You never know how one small act of kindness can quietly rebuild a life that has been slowly falling apart. Sometimes the person who shows up to fix a broken gate ends up fixing something far more broken, something invisible, something the person has been quietly carrying alone for years. This is not a love story, not a dramatic rescue, not a Hollywood moment. This is just a real story about a real woman, a real man, and the kind of gentleness that most people never see coming because they've stopped expecting it. Margaret Elaine Booth was 53 years old, and she had learned, over many long and quiet years, not to ask people for help. It wasn't always like that. There was a time when Margaret was the kind of woman who laughed easily, who called her neighbors by their first names, who left her front door unlocked on Sunday afternoons because people were always dropping by. That version of Margaret existed in a yellow house in Clarksville, Tennessee, in a time before the divorce, before the layoffs, before the health scares, before all the things that had slowly, quietly trimmed her world down to something very small and very manageable. She had learned to manage. She was good at managing. She told herself that every morning when she woke up and made her one cup of coffee and sat alone at the kitchen table and watched the backyard through the window. The house she lived in now was in a suburb outside of Columbus, Ohio. She had moved there 4 years ago after her sister offered her a place to reset. The neighborhood was decent. The neighbors were polite in the way that people are polite when they don't actually know each other, a nod here, a wave there, nothing that required anything real. Margaret was fine with that. She had stopped requiring anything real from people, because real things came with real disappointment, and she had had enough of that particular experience to last several lifetimes. The gate was the first thing that had broken. It was a wooden side gate that led from the driveway into the backyard. Old wood, painted white at some point in a past decade, now faded to a sort of gray-white that suggested the paint had simply given up. The hinges had been rusting since she moved in, but she had ignored them the way she ignored most things that weren't immediately urgent. But, by late October of that year, the gate had stopped closing properly. It would swing open in the night when the wind picked up, and she would hear it banging against the fence post at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, and she would lie in bed and listen to it and tell herself she would deal with it tomorrow. Tomorrow kept not coming. It wasn't laziness. Margaret was not a lazy woman. She worked part-time at a pediatric clinic as a medical records coordinator, she kept her house reasonably clean, she paid her bills on time and, sometimes early. But, there was a particular kind of exhaustion that she lived with, a bone-level tiredness that had nothing to do with how much sleep she got or didn't get, and that tiredness made even small tasks feel enormous. Calling a repair person meant finding one, which meant researching, which meant reading reviews, which meant trusting a stranger to come to her property and not overcharge her or make her feel stupid for not having fixed it herself sooner. It was too much. It was always just slightly too much. So the gate kept banging. It was her coworker, a younger woman named Priya, who finally said something. Priya was 28, practical, cheerful in a way that Margaret sometimes found exhausting and sometimes found genuinely comforting. They were eating lunch together in the break room one afternoon in early November when Margaret mentioned, offhandedly, that she hadn't been sleeping well because of the noise. "What kind of noise?" Priya asked. "My gate. It won't stay closed. The hinge is broken or the latch or I don't really know what's wrong with it, exactly. It just won't stay." Priya looked at her the way young people sometimes look at older people when they can't quite understand why a problem hasn't been solved yet. "So call someone," she said simply. "I know," Margaret said. "I will. My uncle does handyman stuff," Priya said, pulling out her phone. "He's not expensive and he's actually good. He fixed my landlord's entire porch railing last spring. Do you want his number?" Margaret almost said no. The word formed in her mouth automatically, the way it always did when someone offered her something. But she looked down at her sandwich and thought about the sound of the gate at 2 in the morning, and she thought about how tired she was, and she said, "Okay. Sure." Priya texted her the number before they even finished lunch. The name on the contact was simply Daniel Reeves, handyman. Good guy. Margaret saved the number and didn't call it for 11 days. She told herself she was busy. She told herself she'd call on the weekend. She told herself she needed to think about what exactly to say. But, the real reason, the one she didn't examine too closely, was that calling felt like admitting something. It felt like saying out loud, "I cannot handle this myself. I need someone." And, Margaret had built a very careful life around not needing anyone. It was a Wednesday night, somewhere around midnight, when the gate woke her up again. It wasn't just the banging this time. The wind was strong, and something, a branch maybe, or a piece of the old fence, had caught against the gate and was scraping rhythmically against the wood in a sound that she could only describe as desperate. She lay in the dark and listened to it for 45 minutes. Then, she got up, found her phone on the nightstand, and typed out a text message. She typed, "Hi, my name is Margaret Booth. Priya gave me your number. I have a gate that needs to be fixed. It won't close properly. I'm sorry to bother you. Please let me know if you're available and what it would cost. Thank you." She reread it 3 times. She deleted "I'm sorry to bother you" and then added it back. She deleted it again. She sent the message at 12:47 in the morning and then put her phone face down on the nightstand and pulled the covers up and listened to the gate until she finally fell asleep. She woke up to a reply at 6:15 a.m. "Good morning, Margaret. No bother at all, that's what I'm here for. Happy to come take a look at the gate. I'm free this Saturday morning if that works for you, around 9 or 10. Just let me know what's best. Daniel." She read it twice. Then, a third time. She wasn't sure what she had expected, something more transactional maybe, something with a price attached immediately, or a list of questions about the dimensions of the gate and the type of hinge and what her budget was. She hadn't expected "good morning." She hadn't expected "no bother at all." She hadn't expected her name to appear in his message like he had read it and remembered it. She typed back, "Saturday at 10 would be perfect. Thank you." And she got up and made her coffee. Saturday came gray and cold, the way November Saturdays in Ohio tend to arrive, without ceremony, without warmth, just a flat pale sky and the smell of leaves that had already gone past their best. Margaret had cleaned the kitchen that morning for no particular reason, which she recognized as a nervous habit. She had also changed her shirt twice, which she recognized as another nervous habit, and which irritated her because there was no reason to be nervous about a handyman coming to look at a gate. She told herself that as she waited by the front window at 9:58. At exactly 10:01, a dark gray pickup truck pulled up in front of the house. The man who got out was not what she had constructed in her mind. She wasn't sure what she had constructed, exactly, something more generic, she supposed, more interchangeable. Daniel Reeves was somewhere in his late 40s, broad-shouldered but not imposing, with dark hair going gray at the temples and the kind of face that had clearly spent a lot of time outdoors without being particularly bothered by it. He wore a flannel jacket, work boots, and jeans, and he carried a small toolbox in one hand and a thermos in the other. He looked up at the house before he came to the door, the way people do when they're reading a place. Not judging it, just reading it. Margaret noticed that distinction, though she couldn't have explained why it mattered to her. She opened the front door before he knocked. "Margaret," he said, and he smiled. Not a big salesman smile. Just a regular, unaffected smile, the kind that didn't require anything back. "Yes," she said. "Daniel?" "That's me." He held up the thermos slightly. "Hope you don't mind, long drive, brought coffee." "Of course not," she said. "The gate is on the side. I'll take you around." She led him along the front walk and down the driveway toward the side of the house. The gate stood there looking exactly as defeated as it had been sounding at 2 in the morning, the latch hanging at a wrong angle, one hinge clearly pulling away from the wood, the whole structure slightly tilted as if it had been trying to lean away from the fence for some time. Daniel set down his toolbox and crouched in front of the gate without saying anything for a moment. He opened it slowly, watched how it moved, let it swing back. He ran his thumb along the hinge plate, checked the latch mechanism, pressed on the post. Then, he stood up and looked at her, and what he said was not a number. What he said was not a list of problems designed to make her feel bad about letting it get this far. What he said was, "This is fixable. It's not as bad as it looks. And Margaret, standing in her driveway on a gray Saturday morning in November, felt something release in her chest that she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "How long has it been like this?" he asked, not accusingly, just conversationally, the way a doctor asks how long your shoulder has been sore, just gathering information. "A while," she admitted. "I kept meaning to deal with it." He nodded like that was a perfectly reasonable thing. Like he had heard it before and understood it. These old hinges rust out and it happens gradually, so you don't always notice until it's really gone. He crouched back down and opened his toolbox. "I'll pull this apart and see what we're actually working with. Might be able to save the hardware, might need to replace the hinges. Either way, shouldn't take more than an hour." "Okay," she said. "Can I ask, what do you charge for something like this?" He looked up at her. "Let me see what it needs first," he said. "I don't like giving numbers before I know what I'm actually dealing with. It's not fair to either of us." She went inside to give him space to work, though she found herself checking the window more times than was strictly necessary, not because she didn't trust him, but because she wasn't sure what to do with herself while someone was doing something for her. About 20 minutes in, he knocked lightly on the back door that led from the kitchen to the small patio. She opened it. "The wood on the post is soft," he told her. "Not rotted through yet, but getting there. I can fix the gate today, new hinges, new latch, it'll close properly and stop swinging open. But I want to be honest with you, the post is going to need attention in the next year or so, or you'll be back to the same problem." He was not trying to sell her anything. She could tell the difference. He was just telling her the truth. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Of course." He paused. "Do you want me to take a look at it while I'm here, or would you rather just handle the gate today?" "Just the gate today," she said. "But, yes. I'd like to know what the post situation actually is." "I'll write it down for you so you have it," he said. "What to look for, what kind of post you'd need, ballpark on the cost. That way you have the information and you can decide what you want to do and when." She looked at him for a second. "You don't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said, and he went back to work. She stood at the kitchen window and watched him work. He worked quietly and efficiently, without the kind of performative busyness that some tradespeople put on to justify their rates. He just worked. He replaced both hinges, replaced the latch, adjusted the angle of the gate, tested it 4 or 5 times, made a small adjustment, tested it again. The whole time, he moved with a kind of patience that Margaret found herself watching more than she expected to. When he knocked on the back door again, the gate behind him was closed. Properly closed. Quietly closed. "All done," he said. She stepped outside and walked over to it. She opened it, let it swing. It swung evenly, smoothly. She closed it. The latch caught with a clean, simple click. It was such a small thing. She knew it was a small thing. But her eyes filled up before she could stop them, and she turned her face slightly away so he wouldn't see, and she pressed her lips together and swallowed. "How much do I owe you?" she asked, and her voice came out almost steady. He told her a number that was so reasonable she almost asked him to repeat it. She paid him in cash, which she had gotten out of the ATM the night before, and she handed him the folded bills and he tucked them in his jacket pocket without counting them, which somehow felt like a form of respect. He handed her a small folded piece of paper. "Post situation," he said. "Like I said, no rush. Just so you have it." She took it. "Thank you," she said. "Really?" He picked up his toolbox. He looked at the gate one more time, the way someone looks at something they made sure to do right. Then, he looked at her. "Take care of yourself, Margaret," he said. And he walked back down the driveway to his truck. She stood in the backyard for a moment after he was gone. The gate was closed. The latch was holding. Somewhere across the yard, a crow made one clean sound and, then, was quiet. She unfolded the piece of paper he had given her. At the top, in clear, simple handwriting, it said, "Post notes for Margaret, nothing urgent, but here's what to watch for." And, below that, he had written everything down. Simply. Clearly. Like she deserved to understand. She stood there reading it until the cold got through her jacket. Then, she went inside and made herself a second cup of coffee, which she almost never did. And she sat at the kitchen table, and she did not feel alone in the way she usually felt alone on a Saturday morning. She wasn't sure what to do with that. But she held on to it. The folded piece of paper stayed on Margaret's kitchen counter for 6 days. She didn't tape it up, didn't file it away, didn't throw it in a drawer like she did with most paperwork that didn't require immediate action. She left it on the counter next to the fruit bowl, partly because she kept meaning to read it again, and partly, though she wouldn't have said this out loud, because it was nice to see something handwritten sitting there. Something that someone had taken the time to write out for her, carefully, by hand, not because they were required to, but because they had decided it was the right thing to do. She mentioned Daniel to Priya at work on Monday in the most casual way she could manage, which still ended up being slightly less casual than she intended. "Your uncle's friend came on Saturday," she said, during a quiet stretch in the afternoon. Priya looked up from her computer. "Daniel? How was he?" "Good," Margaret said. "He was good. He fixed the gate and he was very reasonable. With the price. And he was very," she paused, because the word she wanted was not one she had expected to use. "Thorough." Priya smiled in that knowing way that 28-year-olds smile when they think they understand something about you. "He's a good guy," she said. "Has a lot going on, but he's just good people, you know?" Margaret said, "What does that mean, has a lot going on?" Priya shrugged lightly. "He lost his wife about 3 years ago. Cancer. He's got a teenage daughter, raises her himself. He kind of threw himself into the work after. Keeps busy." She said it matter-of-factly, not dramatically, the way you say things about people when you've known them long enough that the sadness has settled into just being a part of their story. Margaret looked back at her monitor. "I didn't know that," she said quietly. "Why would you?" Priya said, and went back to typing. But something shifted in Margaret after that conversation. Not in a dramatic way. Margaret didn't do dramatic. It shifted the way furniture shifts when you move one piece and, suddenly, the light in the room falls differently. She thought about him that evening when she went home and heard the gate close behind her, that clean, quiet click, and she thought about a man who had come to her house carrying a thermos of coffee and a calm she couldn't have described but absolutely noticed, and who had, apparently, been carrying something very heavy for 3 years without letting it show in his face or his hands or the way he talked to her. She thought he didn't have to write those notes down. She thought he didn't have to say good morning at 6 a.m. She thought he didn't have to look at my gate like it mattered to him that it was done right. She folded the piece of paper and put it in the small drawer in the kitchen where she kept things she wanted to keep. Then, she went and made dinner and watched something forgettable on television and went to bed. December came in like a quiet apology, not too cold, not too dramatic, just gray and soft and steady. Margaret's sister called from Clarksville every Sunday, and their conversations followed a rhythm so established it had become almost musical. "How is the job? How is the neighborhood? Are you eating? Have you made any friends?" Margaret gave her the usual answers, which were all technically true and none of which captured anything real. She was fine. The job was the same. The neighborhood was fine. She was eating. She had not made any friends, but she was not unhappy, and she had stopped expecting those things to be the same. It was the second week of December when the text came from Daniel. She had not texted him since the Saturday he came. She had thought about it once, in a vague way. She had wanted to send a follow-up thank you, which she had then decided was strange and unnecessary, and then decided wasn't strange, and then didn't send anyway. So she was genuinely surprised when her phone showed his name. "Hi Margaret, hope you're doing well. I was in your neighborhood this morning doing a job a few streets over and I noticed your gate when I drove past. The post on the left side, the one I mentioned in my notes, is starting to lean a bit. Could just be the ground settling with the cold, but I wanted to let you know. You don't need to do anything about it immediately. Just worth keeping an eye on before spring. Hope that's okay that I texted. Take care." Daniel, she read it standing in the parking lot of the grocery store, a bag of vegetables in one hand, keys in the other. She read it twice. Then, she stood there for an extra moment longer than made sense, in the cold, in the gray December parking lot, reading a text message about a fence post and trying to work out why her chest felt the way it did. He had noticed. He had been driving past he had noticed, and he had taken a minute to let her know, and he had apologized for texting in case it wasn't okay, and he had told her not to worry about it immediately. She typed, "Thank you, Daniel. I really appreciate you letting me know. I hope your job today went well." She pressed send and walked to her car. His reply came 4 minutes later, "Went great. Cold but great. Stay warm, Margaret." She sat in the parked car for a moment. She was smiling. She noticed that she was smiling and she felt briefly embarrassed by it, and then she decided she wasn't going to be embarrassed by it. She started the car and drove home. She called him 2 weeks before Christmas. Not about the post. She wasn't even sure, at first, why exactly she was calling. She had told herself it was because she had noticed a small issue with one of the boards on the back fence, which was true. There was a board that had started to warp slightly, but she was self-aware enough to know that she was also calling because she wanted to hear how he answered the phone, and whether he would be the same person on the phone that he had been standing in her driveway. He answered on the third ring. "Daniel Reeves." "Hi," she said. "It's Margaret Booth. You fixed my gate in November." A pause. A real pause, not an awkward one, the kind of pause that means someone is actually remembering, not just performing recognition. "Margaret, hi. How are you? How's the gate holding up?" "The gate is perfect," she said. That's not why I'm calling. I have a board on the back fence that's starting to warp. I wasn't sure if that's something you do, or if it's too small a job." "There's no such thing as too small a job," he said. "Tell me about it." So she did. She described it as well as she could, which board, how much it was warping, whether it was a structural issue or just cosmetic. He asked a few questions. How old was the fence? Did she know what kind of wood? Had she noticed any others starting to do the same? He listened to her answers without interrupting, and, when she was done, he said, "I can take a look after the holidays if that works." "First week of January, probably." "That would be perfect," she said. "Thank you." There was a small pause. Then, he said, "How are you doing, Margaret?" Not the fence, just in general. The question caught her completely off guard. Not because it was inappropriate, it wasn't, it was a perfectly normal thing to ask, but because almost no one asked her that, in those words, in that specific unadorned way. People asked how she was doing all the time. They asked it as greeting, as filler, as transition. They did not usually ask it and, then, add not the fence, just in general with a kind of specificity that suggested they actually wanted to know the difference. "I'm okay," she said. And then, because there was something about his voice that made it hard to lie with full commitment, "Honestly, the holidays are a bit quiet for me. But I'm managing fine." "Quiet can be hard," he said. He didn't try to fix it. He didn't tell her to get out more or call family or find a hobby. He just acknowledged it, plain and simple, the way you acknowledge weather. "It can be," she agreed. "My daughter's home from her school trip this week," he said, and his voice changed the way voices change when people talk about something they love without realizing they're revealing it. "So it's a little loud at my end. She has strong opinions about the Christmas tree." Margaret laughed. It came out naturally, which surprised her. "How old is she?" 15. Going on 45. He said it with a warmth that was unmistakable. "She's a good kid. Keeps me on my toes." "That sounds like a good problem to have," Margaret said. "It really is," he said. They talked for a few more minutes. Nothing important. Nothing that would matter if you wrote it down, the weather, the holidays, a little about the neighborhood. But, when she hung up, she sat on the couch in her living room and noticed that the apartment felt less quiet than it usually did after a phone call. It felt like someone had opened a window briefly and let some air in and then closed it again gently. He came in the first week of January, as promised. The warped board turned out to be simple. A nail had worked itself loose and the board had shifted, nothing structural, a 10-minute fix. He replaced 2 nails and added a third for good measure. While he was back there, he looked at the post he had mentioned in the fall and told her it had held up reasonably well through the cold and she had at least another season, maybe 2, before it needed serious attention. He said it like it was good news, because it was. Afterward, she asked if he wanted coffee. She surprised herself by asking. She almost didn't. She had the question in her mouth and then almost swallowed it, told herself it was too much, too familiar, he was just the person who fixed her fence. But she asked it anyway, because she was tired of swallowing things, because it was cold and he had driven over here and she had a full pot on. He looked at her for a half second, and then, he said, "That would be really nice, actually." "Thank you." She made 2 cups. They sat at the kitchen table. It should have been awkward, a woman she didn't know well and a man she didn't know at all, sitting in her kitchen in January, drinking coffee over nothing in particular. It was not awkward. She wasn't entirely sure how that was possible, but it wasn't. He told her about a job he'd had the week before that had gone sideways in a minor but ridiculous way, involving a bathroom tile and a very confident homeowner who was, it turned out, not as skilled with a level as he believed himself to be. She laughed. He told the story with the quiet, dry humor of a man who had seen enough of the world to find it mostly funny rather than mostly frustrating. She told him about Priya at work, about something funny that had happened at the clinic the week before involving a misfiled record and 3 different doctors calling about the same patient. He laughed. He asked questions about her job, about what her role actually involved, in the genuine way that people ask when they want to understand how something works, not just to have something to say. They were at the table for almost 45 minutes. When he stood to leave, he picked up his toolbox from the kitchen floor and carried his cup to the sink, which she had not asked him to do and which he did automatically, without drama. He rinsed it and set it beside the sink. "Thank you for the coffee," he said. "Thank you for coming out," she said. He started toward the door. Then, he turned back once, and he said, "If anything comes up with the gate or the fence, just text me." And if nothing comes up, he paused, and the corner of his mouth moved, just slightly. "You can text me anyway." Margaret looked at him. She felt something warm move through her chest, and this time she let it stay there instead of examining it. "Okay," she said. "I will." He nodded. He went to his truck. She watched from the window as he pulled away, and then she looked at the gate through the glass, steady, level, doing what it was supposed to do, and she thought about how strange it was. How a broken thing, properly attended to, could sometimes open up something else entirely. She washed both cups. She dried them and put them away. She stood in the kitchen for a moment, alone, and the aloneness felt different than it had for a very long time. Not smaller, exactly. But less heavy. Like it was something she was visiting rather than something she was living inside of permanently. She looked at the drawer where she'd put his handwritten notes. She thought, maybe some things are worth fixing. And, she thought, maybe some people are worth letting in. She wasn't ready to say that out loud yet. But, she was, for the first time in years, ready to think it. January moved the way January always does, slowly, inside itself, with the particular stubbornness of a month that refuses to pretend it's something better than it is. The days were short and pale. The neighborhood went quiet in the early evenings. Margaret drove to work in the dark and drove home in the dark and found herself, more than once, reaching for her phone and looking at Daniel's name in her contacts and thinking about what she might say to him. Most days, she put the phone down. Some days, she sent something small. A question about the fence. A photo of the post she'd been watching. Once, inexplicably, a picture of a bird she'd seen on the back porch because she hadn't known who else she would send it to, and she almost didn't send it, and then, she said it, and he wrote back, "That's a dark-eyed junco. My daughter would love this." And she had stood in her kitchen holding her phone and felt something she hadn't felt in years, the simple, uncomplicated pleasure of having shared something with another person and having them receive it well. She texted him the next day to ask how his daughter's school project was going. He texted her back a photo of a very lopsided volcano made of papier-mâché with the caption, "She says she did her best." I believe her. Margaret sat on her couch and laughed, alone, in a quiet house, and realized that she couldn't remember the last time she had laughed like that in her own home, by herself, for no reason that required an audience. It was Priya who noticed first. "You're different lately," she said, on a Tuesday afternoon in February. They were in the break room again, their usual territory for conversations that happened between bites of lunch and glances at the clock. Margaret looked up. "What do you mean, different?" "I don't know exactly." "Less," Priya searched for the word. "Less closed off. Like you're not carrying something as heavily." Margaret considered that. She could have deflected. She was very good at deflecting. "I've been texting your uncle's friend," she said instead. Priya's face went immediately alive. "Daniel?" "Not like that," Margaret said, though she was aware that the words came out slightly too quickly. "He did the fence board last month. And I don't know. We text sometimes." Priya was quiet for a moment in the way that people are quiet when they are deliberately choosing not to say what they want to say. Then, she said, carefully, "He's a really good man, Margaret." "I know," Margaret said. "I can tell that." I'm not," she stopped. She picked up her fork and set it down again. "It's just nice," she said finally. "It's just been really nice. That's all I'm saying." Priya looked at her with something that was not quite a smile but lived near one. "Okay," she said. "That's all I'm saying too." He called her on a Saturday in mid-February. Not a text, a call. She almost didn't answer because she wasn't sure why he would be calling instead of texting, and the uncertainty made her chest tight for a half-second. She answered. "Hi Margaret." "Hi Daniel." "I know this is a little out of nowhere," he said, and she noticed that he sounded slightly different, not less calm, but something more intentional about the calm, if that made sense. "My daughter's school is doing a fundraiser dinner this Friday. The kind of thing where you're supposed to bring someone." He paused. "I know you might be busy. I just thought I'd ask." Margaret sat down on the arm of the couch. Her heart was doing something that she told herself firmly was a perfectly reasonable physiological response to an unexpected social invitation and absolutely not anything more significant than that. "A school dinner," she said. "Yeah. At the school. There will be very mediocre lasagna and a silent auction. My daughter is running the dessert table, which she takes extremely seriously." Margaret felt the laugh come up before she could decide whether to let it out. It came out. "I would love to come," she said. There was a beat of silence on his end that she would think about later, a small, quiet beat, the kind that sounds like relief. "Good," he said. "Really good. I'll send you the details." She hung up and sat on the arm of the couch for a long time, doing nothing in particular. The house was quiet. The gate was closed in the backyard. Outside, February was being February, colorless, patient, unhurried. She looked at her hands in her lap. She thought about what it meant to go somewhere with someone. What it cost to let the wall down that one more inch, and whether the inch was worth it. She had been afraid of that inch for 4 years. She thought about the gate. She thought about how she had let it go broken for months because calling someone required trust, and trust required risk, and risk meant possibly getting hurt, and she had been hurt before in ways that had reorganized everything about how she moved through the world. And then, a man had come and crouched in her driveway and said, "This is fixable. It's not as bad as it looks." And he had fixed it. And then, he had written her notes she didn't ask for. And checked her post from the road. And rinsed his coffee cup and dried his hands and said, "You can text me anyway," without making it a bigger thing than it needed to be. He had been patient with her without even knowing he was being patient with her. He had given her space and also stayed close. He had not pushed and he had not disappeared. He had just been there, steadily, like someone who understood that some things take time and that's okay. She got up and went to the kitchen. She looked at the drawer. She opened it and took out the folded piece of paper he had written her notes on in November. She unfolded it and read it again, all the way through, and then she folded it back up carefully and put it back in the drawer. She was going to be okay. She had known that, in a general way, for some time. But this felt different. This felt like she was going to be okay and, also more than okay, and that the more than okay part was not something she had to be afraid of. The dinner was on a Friday. He picked her up at 6:30. She had told herself not to make a thing of getting ready, and then she had made a somewhat small thing of it, because she was human. She wore a blue sweater and her good dark jeans and the earrings that her sister had given her 3 Christmases ago that she had never worn anywhere because there had been nowhere that warranted them. Daniel was wearing a button-down shirt and the same boots. He looked exactly like himself, which she had come to understand was one of the things she most appreciated about him. "You look nice," he said, at the door. Simply. Not like a compliment he had rehearsed. Just an observation. "Thank you," she said. "So do you." They drove to the school. He told her about his daughter. Her name was Cora, she was 15, she had been talking about this dessert table for 3 weeks, she had made 2 different kinds of brownies from scratch and was fiercely competitive about the quality of the frosting. Margaret listened and asked questions. He answered them the way he answered everything, completely, without the kind of performative modesty that people use to seem humble while actually showing off. He just told her things straight. "Are you nervous?" he asked at a red light. "A little," she said. "Honestly." "Me too," he said. And he looked over at her when he said it, briefly, just long enough for her to see that he meant it. She hadn't expected that. She had somehow constructed him as a person who didn't get nervous, who was too steady for nerves. But it made sense, of course it made sense. He was a man who had lost his wife and raised his daughter alone and spent 3 years building a life back out of something broken, and he had called a woman he barely knew and asked her to come to a school fundraiser, which took a particular kind of courage that didn't look like courage from the outside. "Okay," she said. "Good. Good," he agreed. Cora was exactly what her father had described, 15 years old and, fiercely, beautifully serious about the dessert table. She was tall like her father, with dark eyes and the kind of direct gaze that made you feel she had already assessed you and would tell you what she found if you asked. She looked at Margaret for 1 full second when Daniel introduced them, and then, she said, "My dad has told me about you." "The gate lady." "Cora," Daniel said. "What?" "That's what he called you," Cora said to Margaret. "The gate lady." "But he also said you were easy to talk to." Margaret looked at Daniel, whose expression was a very controlled version of a man who wishes the floor would gently absorb him. She looked back at Cora. "I am the gate lady," she said. "The brownies look incredible." Cora accepted this immediately. "I made 2 kinds. The frosting on the left one is better." She pointed. "Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Margaret tried the left one first. The frosting was, genuinely, exceptional. The evening moved in the easy, unpretentious way that events move when the company is right. There was, as promised, mediocre lasagna. There was a silent auction, for which Margaret bid on a handmade quilt she did not particularly need but felt good about bidding on. There were parents and teachers and teenagers running around with plates of food, and there was noise and there was warmth from the sheer concentrated presence of all those people inside a school gymnasium that smelled like every school gymnasium Margaret had ever been in. She did not feel out of place. She had expected to feel out of place. She and Daniel sat together at the end of a long table, and they talked without running out of things to say, and once he put his hand briefly on the back of her chair when he leaned over to point at something across the room, and she felt it without reacting to it, just noted it the way you note a small warmth, and filed it somewhere important. When Cora came by the table near the end of the evening, she sat down across from them both and said, to no one in particular, "Okay, I think it went well." She looked at Margaret. "Are you coming to the spring one?" Margaret glanced at Daniel. He looked back at her with an expression that said everything and committed to nothing and left the whole question entirely up to her. "I'd like to," Margaret said.
If I'm invited. Cora shrugged in the magnificent way of teenagers who feel things deeply and would die before admitting it.
Obviously, she said. He walked her to her door at 9:30. The night was cold and clear in the way that February nights get near the end of the month, when winter has finally started to release its grip just slightly. The stars were sharp and the air smelled like cold concrete and dry leaves. They stood at her door, and she thought about the last time she had stood at her own door and felt the way she felt right now, which was like someone who had just returned from a good place rather than someone who was coming home to an empty house.
It had been a very long time. "Thank you for coming," he said. "Thank you for asking me," she said. A pause. A comfortable one. The kind of pause that doesn't need filling. "Can I take you to dinner?" he said. "Not a school fundraiser. Actual dinner, somewhere that has acceptable food." She looked at him. He was not nervous in the way he had been in the car, or he was still nervous, but more settled inside it, the way someone looks when they've decided to do something and are just waiting to see how it lands. "Yes," she said. "I'd really like that." He smiled. The same smile as the first day, uncomplicated, unperformed, just real. "Good," he said. "I'll text you." "Okay." He walked back to his truck. She stood at the door and watched him go, the way she had watched him from the window in November, except now it felt different, not like watching someone leave, but like watching someone who was going to come back. She went inside. She hung up her coat. She sat on the couch in the quiet house, and the quiet felt entirely different than it had ever felt before. It felt like something she was choosing rather than something that had been handed to her. It felt like a pause before something, not an ending of something. She looked across the room toward the kitchen, toward the back of the house, toward the invisible gate beyond the window. She thought about all the things that had been quietly broken in her life over the years, not just the gate, but the trust, the openness, the willingness to let someone matter. She thought about how she had gotten so good at managing everything alone that she had started to confuse managing with living. She thought about a man who had crouched in her driveway and said, "It's fixable. It's not as bad as it looks." And she wondered if he had known, even then, that he wasn't just talking about the gate. Her phone lit up on the cushion beside her. A text from Daniel, "I had a really good night. Thank you." She looked at it. She typed back, "Me too. Thank you for a really good night." She put the phone down and sat in the quiet of her house, and outside, the gate was where it should be, holding steady, doing what it had always been meant to do, not just keeping the world out, but marking the place where someone could open it and come in. And, for the first time in a long time, she was glad that it worked. For the first time in a long time, she wanted it to. Sometimes the smallest request, a broken gate, a loose hinge, a latch that won't hold, is the door through which something bigger quietly enters. Not with fanfare. Not with drama. Just with patience, and presence, and the kind of gentleness that doesn't announce itself. That is usually how the best things come.